Okay, guys, our today's topic is human respiratory system. So, human respiratory system, it is concerned with inhaling atmospheric air, taking oxygen from this atmospheric air, then blood gives back carbon dioxide into the lungs, and then this atmospheric air is exhaled along with that carbon dioxide, which is downloaded from the blood, right? So, simply we say our respiratory system, it is concerned with gas exchange. You might have read about this external respiration and internal respiration in your lower classes. So I hope you are knowing what is external respiration, what is internal respiration. We simply call external respiration as ventilation or breathing. So exchange of gases with surrounding atmosphere, that is known as external respiration. And internal respiration is the oxidation of food molecules by the help of oxygen in our body cells, which is also known as cellular respiration. So I'm not going to discuss about that. So today we are going to discuss about the respiratory system. It is morphology, it is physiology, right? So we divide respiratory system into respiratory tract, respiratory tract, and the respiratory organs, and the respiratory organs. So our respiratory system consists of a respiratory tract. Respiratory tract is the passage through which the air enters into our lungs. Then respiratory organs, they are the lungs. They are the actual site of exchange of gases, where gas exchange occurs with blood, right? So this respiratory tract, it involves our nose, it involves larynx, trachea, then bronchi, terminal bronchi, terminal bronchi, and finally alveolar ducts. Then they open into alveoli. Alveoli are present in the lungs. Alveoli, they are the part of lungs, right? So this path through which air, atmospheric air, enters into our body. That means nose, larynx, trachea, bronchi, terminal bronchi, alveolar ducts, etc. They form the respiratory tract. So first we will discuss this respiratory tract in detail. So we will first discuss where from this respiratory tract starts and what are its components. So respiratory tract, it starts from the nose. Our nose is provided with two external openings. Those two external openings of our nose, external openings of our nose, they are known as external nares. They are known as external nares. So our respiratory tract, it starts from the nose. Our nose is provided with two external openings known as external nares. So we inhale the atmospheric air through these external nares. Then this nose opens into a short and broad chamber. These are the external nares here. They open into a short and broad chamber. This short and broad chamber, which is visible externally as well, this is known as the vestibule. Vestibule of the nose. These are the external nares. These are external nares. So we inhale the atmospheric air through these external nares. These external nares, they open into a short and broad chamber. This is known as vestibule. The inner surface of this vestibule, it is lined with nasal hairs. In the inner surface of vestibule, there are nasal hairs. There are nasal hairs. There are nasal hairs. What is the function of these nasal hairs? What is the function of these nasal hair? These nasal hair, they act as strainers. They filter the inhaling air. They stop the entry of dust particles into nasal chambers. So these nasal hair, which are present in the vestibule, they act as filters. They filter the inhaled air, right? So if there are any dust particles, they will be stopped from entering into nasal chambers by these nasal hair. Although they cannot stop all the dust particles, but some of the dust particles are stopped by these nasal hair. Then this vestibule, it leads into a broad chamber. This broad chamber is known as nasal chamber. This is the nasal chamber. Vestibule opens into nasal chambers. Our nose is having two nasal chambers. One on the right side of the one on the left side of the nose, right? In our nose, we have got two nasal chambers. One on the right side and another on the left side. These nasal chambers are separated from each other by a bony and a cartilaginous septum. The anterior part of this nasal septum, that is cartilaginous, while as the posterior part of this nasal septum, that is bony. So this nasal septum, it separates the two nasal chambers from each other. So right nostril opens into right nasal chamber. Left nostril opens into left nasal chamber. These nasal chambers, they are separated from each other. They are partitioned internally by a partition known as nasal septum. So this is the nasal septum here. This is the nasal septum. Nasal septum. Anterior part of this nasal septum, it is cartilaginous, while as its posterior part, that is the bony part, right? So when the inhaled air enters into vestibule, from vestibule, it goes into nasal chambers. These nasal chambers, they are lined by two types of epithelium. One epithelium is present on the roof of nasal chambers. This epithelium which is present on the roof of nasal chamber, this epithelium, it is known as the olfactory epithelium. This is the olfactory epithelium. Olfactory epithelium. The roof of nasal chambers, they are lined by a special epithelium known as olfactory epithelium. In this olfactory epithelium, there are neurosensory cells and there are also supporting cells. So this olfactory epithelium, it is concerned with olfaction. Olfaction means detection of smell. It is concerned with detection of smell. It is present on the roof of the nasal chambers. Internally, each nasal chamber is drawn into three ridge-like structures. These three ridge-like structures, which are present in the nasal chambers, they are known as the nasal conchae. Each nasal chamber is internally having three ridge-like structures. Those three ridge-like structures, they are known as the nasal conchae. So this upper ridge-like structure, it is known as superior concha. It is the superior concha. This is the middle concha. Middle concha. And this is the inferior concha. Inferior concha. So there are nasal conchae. There are nasal conchae. So these are together known as nasal conchae. They are present, these nasal conchae, they are present in each nasal chamber. So in each nasal chamber, there are three ridge-like structures. These three ridge-like structures, they are together known as nasal conchae. Uppermost is known as superior concha, middle one is known as middle concha, and the lowermost is known as inferior concha. What is the function of these nasal conchae in the nasal chambers? These nasal conchae and the nasal chambers, remaining nasal chambers, except this olfactory epithelium. This part of nasal chamber, it is lined by an epithelium known as respiratory epithelium. This part of nasal chamber is lined by an epithelium known as respiratory epithelium. So on the roof of nasal chambers, There is olfactory epithelium. Remaining part of nasal chambers, they are covered by another type of epithelium known as respiratory epithelium. This respiratory epithelium, it is rich in blood capillaries, blood vessels, and its cells also produce mucus. Its cells also produce mucus. So, what is the function of these nasal conchae in this nasal chamber? These nasal conchae, they act as barriers. They stop the inhaled air temporarily for some time in these nasal chambers, so that this inhaled air, it is warmed up by the heat of blood vessels, by the heat of blood circulation, which is present in respiratory epithelium. So respiratory epithelium, it is rich in blood vessels. Those blood vessels, they are radiating out heat. So when we inhale the air, this inhaled air, it is stopped for some time in these nasal chambers by these nasal conchae. Why they stop the air for some time in this nasal chamber for some time? They stop the inhaled air for some time here to warm up this air, to warm up this air. So they are meant for air conditioning. They are meant for air conditioning. They are meant for air conditioning. In cold atmosphere, in cold weather, if we inhale air directly into our lungs without conditioning it, it may freeze the mucous membrane of the lungs. It can cause problems. So in cold weather, when we inhale the air through the nose, nasal conchae, they stop the air for some time in the nasal chambers. That warms up the air. The heat of blood, it warms up the air. And this warmed up air is then inhaled out. It doesn't cause any damage to the trachea and the rest of the respiratory tract. If we do not stop the air for some time, if we would have inhaled that cold air directly into our lungs, this cold air could freeze the mucous membrane of the respiratory tract, creating a lot of problem, right? So for better air conditioning, these nasal conchae, they stop the air in the nasal chambers. This is one reason. Another reason is that when we inhale the air, this inhaled air, it contains some chemicals in it. So when the air is stopped for some time in the nasal chambers by these nasal conchae, those chemicals which are present in the inhaled air, they dissolve in the mucus of this olfactory epithelium, watery mucus of olfactory epithelium. This olfactory epithelium, it produces a watery mucus. It is covered by a watery mucus. So these chemicals of the inhaled air, they dissolve in this watery mucus, and from this mucus, these chemicals, they reach to neurosensory cells of olfactory epithelium, and neurosensory cells, they are stimulated, they fire nerve impulses, and those nerve impulses, when they reach to the brain through this olfactory nerve, brain is able to detect the smell of the air. So for smelling, these nasal conchae are also essential. So when we inhale the air, we smell this inhaled air. So when this inhaled air is stopped for a while in nasal chambers by the help of these nasal conchae, in that time, the chemicals which are present in the inhaled air, they dissolve in the watery mucus of olfactory epithelium. From watery mucus, they are carried to neurosensory cells of olfactory epithelium. And neurosensory cells, they get stimulated by those chemicals and they fire nerve impulses. Through olfactory nerve, those nerve impulses reach to brain, where brain is able to detect the smell of this inhaled air, right? So these nasal conchae, they are there for two main reasons. Number first, air conditioning of the inhaled air. Number second, for detection of smell. Number third, when they stop the air for some time in these nasal chambers, the dust particles or dirt particles which might have got into the nasal chambers along with inhaled air, the mucus of this respiratory epithelium, it traps those dust and dirt particles. Mucus of the respiratory epithelium, it traps the dust and dirt particles, preventing their entry into the remaining part of the respiratory tract or preventing their entry into the lungs, right? So these are the three main functions of this nasal chambers. So our respiratory tract, it starts from the nose. Now you know nose has got two openings, right nostril and left nostril. Right nostril opens into right nasal chamber, left nostril opens into left nasal chamber. Two nasal chambers are separated from each other by a nasal septum, right? Inside these nasal chambers, there is the epithelium. The covering of these nasal chambers are hollow structures, hollow cavities. They are lined by epithelium. They are lined by two types of epithelium. One epithelium is present on their roof. This epithelium, which is present on the roof of nasal chamber, this is known as olfactory epithelium. It has got some mucus producing cells and neurosensory cells in it. Mucus producing cells, they produce mucus. Neurosensory cells, they detect the chemicals in inhaled air. And the remaining part of nasal chambers, it is lined by respiratory epithelium. And in this respiratory epithelium, there are three ridge-like structures, ridge-like outgrowths in each nasal chamber. These three ridge-like outgrowths, which are present in each nasal chamber, they are known as nasal conchae. They are known as nasal conchae. Upper one is known as superior concha, middle concha, and the lower one is known as inferior concha. What is the function of these nasal chambers and these nasal conchae? So nasal chambers, they when we inhale the air into these nasal chambers, in these nasal chambers, the inhaled air is stopped for a while by the help of these nasal conchae. So when inhaled air stops for a while in the nasal chambers, heat of the blood vessels, heat of the blood, which is present in the respiratory epithelium, heat of the blood warms up the air. So it helps us in air conditioning so that we don't directly inhale cold air into our lungs. If we inhale cold air directly into our lungs, that may freeze our respiratory tract, that may freeze the mucosa of our respiratory tract, creating problem. Number second, these conchae stop the air in these nasal chambers for a while for detection of smell. So when air stops for a while here, chemicals which are present in this inhaled air, they dissolve in the mucus of this olfactory epithelium, where from these chemicals reach to neurosensory cells of olfactory epithelium. They fire nerve impulses. Those nerve impulses go to brain, where brain interprets the smell of this air. Number third, these nasal conchae, they stop the inhaled air for some time in the nasal chambers so that dust particles which may be present in this inhaled air, they are trapped by this respiratory epithelium, and then this dust along with the mucus, it then flows out through the nostrils in the form of that dust laden mucus, right? So this is the function of nasal chambers. Now these nasal chambers, they open into our pharynx. Now these nasal chambers, they open into pharynx. They open into pharynx. Two openings known as the internal nares. Two openings known as internal nares. These are the internal nares. So through internal nares, these nasal chambers, they open into the posterior part of the pharynx. They open into the posterior part of pharynx. We have discussed this posterior part of pharynx. It is known as the nasopharynx. It is known as the nasopharynx. So this part of the pharynx, it is known as nasopharynx. So internal nares, they open into upper part of pharynx, known as nasopharynx. Then from nasopharynx, this inhaled air, it enters into the glottis, opening of trachea or larynx. This is known as glottis. So when we inhale the air, it comes into nasal chambers. From nasal chambers, then it passes through internal nares into our upper part of this pharynx known as nasopharynx. From nasopharynx, this air goes into larynx. It goes into larynx through an opening known as glottis, which is guarded by a leaf-like cartilage on top. This leaf-like cartilage, as I have told you, this is known as the epiglottis. We have discussed this. This is known as epiglottis. So this epiglottis, it protects this glottis from the entry of food particles and water into it, right? So when we inhale the air, it finally reaches through nasopharynx into glottis. And from glottis, it will go into larynx. Right? Now we will see what is this larynx. As you know, this larynx, it is also known as sound box. Larynx is also known as sound box. It is known as sound box. This larynx in human beings, it is a cartilaginous structure. It is a cartilaginous structure. Larynx is a cartilaginous structure. It consists of four main large cartilages. One is known as thyroid cartilage, one thyroid cartilage, then there are two ethmoid cartilages, and then there is one cricoid cartilage. Cricoid cartilage. These are the four main cartilages of the larynx. So our larynx, it is a cartilaginous structure. Our sound box or voice box, it is a cartilaginous structure. It is formed of many cartilages. The four main cartilages of our larynx are one thyroid cartilage, two ethmoid cartilages, and one cricoid cartilage. This thyroid cartilage, it is present on the front side, and it is somewhat C-shaped. Thyroid cartilage, it is present on the front side of our neck. It is somewhat C-shaped. Behind this thyroid cartilage, on the posterior side of the thyroid cartilage, there are two triangular pieces of cartilage. One and two. These two triangular pieces of cartilage, they are the ethmoid cartilage. They are the ethmoid cartilage. Attached to these ethmoid cartilage are membranes. Known as the vocal cords. Attached to these ethmoid cartilages are membranes known as vocal cords. Vocal cords. And air is blown through these vocal cords. Air is blown through these vocal cords. So when air is blown through these vocal cords are set into vibration and they produce the sound, right? So thyroid cartilage, it is a long C-shaped cartilage. Thyroid cartilage is a long C-shaped cartilage. It is a long C-shaped cartilage. Ethmoid cartilages, they are triangular cartilages which are on back of the thyroid cartilage. Then this thyroid cartilage and these ethmoid cartilages, they are together put into a C-shaped, a ring-like cartilage. That ring-like cartilage is known as cricoid cartilage. They are put into a ring-like cartilage together. That ring-like cartilage, which holds these cartilages together, this ring-like cartilage, it is the cricoid cartilage. Into this cricoid cartilage, these three cartilages are fitted together, right? So our larynx, it is a cartilaginous structure. The front side cartilage, the cartilage which is on the front side of larynx, this cartilage is the thyroid cartilage. On the back side of this thyroid cartilage, there are two triangular cartilages. They are known as ethmoid cartilages. Then this thyroid cartilage and these two ethmoid cartilages, they are fixed in a ring-like cartilage which is present at their base. This ring-like cartilage which is present at their base, into which thyroid and ethmoid cartilages fit together. This cartilage is known as cricoid cartilage. Then we have got stretches of membranes attached to these ethmoid cartilages and thyroid cartilage. So these membrane stretches which are attached to ethmoid cartilages and thyroid cartilage, these membranes are known as vocal cords. So when we blow air through these vocal cords with force, these vocal cords are set into vibration and they produce the sound. So for this reason, our larynx is also known as sound box or voice box. So larynx only produces sound. Larynx only produces sound. And this sound is given a definite shape by the help of tongue and lip movements. So larynx does not produce the speech. Larynx only produces sound. And this sound is turned into speech by the help of tongue and lip movements, right? So for this reason, we call this larynx as sound box. In addition to serving as sound box, it also acts as the passage for the inhaled air to go into trachea. So through this larynx, the inhaled air enters into trachea. Now we will have a look at the trachea. Our trachea, it is a long tube-like structure which follows the larynx. So this is the larynx. Larynx opens into a tube-like structure known as trachea. This trachea, it measures some 11 to 12 centimeter in length. Trachea is some 11 to 12 centimeter long. And it is provided with incomplete C-shaped cartilaginous rings. It is provided with incomplete C-shaped cartilaginous rings. These cartilaginous rings, which support the trachea, they are known as tracheal rings. They are tracheal rings. They are incomplete C-shaped cartilaginous rings. So why these cartilaginous rings are incomplete? Why they are not complete? Why they are incomplete? They are incomplete so that if someone presses our trachea, the free ends of these cartilaginous rings, they may slide over each other. They may slide past each other. So that it becomes compressible, so that it is not easily broken. So that they get compressed, they slide over each other to prevent the breaking of these rings. Our trachea, it is supported by incomplete C-shaped cartilaginous rings. Why these rings are incomplete C-shaped? They are incomplete C-shaped so that if someone applies pressure over our trachea, if someone compresses our trachea, the edges of the ends of these cartilaginous rings, they slide over each other, preventing the breakage of these tracheal rings. Preventing the breakage of these tracheal rings. What is the function of these tracheal rings? They keep this trachea always open. They keep the trachea always open. They prevent its collapsing. So they keep it always open. So there is no hindrance in the airflow. So there is no hindrance in the exchange, in the inhalation of atmospheric air or exhalation of the atmospheric air, right? So they keep it open so that air can be easily inhaled or exhaled. So that is the function of these tracheal rings. There may be some 16 to 20 such tracheal rings in the trachea. There may be some 16 to 12, 20 such tracheal rings in the trachea. Internally, this trachea, it is lined by pseudostratified ciliated epithelium, pseudostratified columnar pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium, pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium, columnar epithelium. So this pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium, it is gland cells, they produce mucus. They produce mucus. This mucus traps the dust particles, which may be inhaled along with inhaled air. So along with inhaled air, We may inhale some dust particles, although some dust particles are stopped by nasal hair. Some dust particles are trapped by respiratory epithelium of nasal chambers. Still, some dust particles may be present in the air. Those dust particles or smoke particles, they are trapped by the mucus of this pseudostratified ciliated epithelium. Then this dust-laden mucus, it is removed from trachea by the help of cilia of the pseudostratified ciliated epithelium. So when the cilia beat, they remove this dust-laden mucus. They propel this dust-laden mucus towards the larynx. They carry this dust-laden mucus towards larynx. When this dust-laden mucus reaches to the larynx, it generates a cough reflex. And when a cough reflex is generated, then we spit out this dust-laden mucus from our mouth, right, in the form of phlegm. So that dust-laden mucus is spitted out of the body in the form of phlegm. So this phlegm is the dust-laden mucus, which rises from trachea into the larynx, and from larynx it comes into the mouth, right? So the function of this trachea is to serve as the passage for the air, right? So it is always kept open by these tracheal rings, and its internal surface is lined with a special type of epithelium known as pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium. So gland cells of this columnar epithelium, they produce mucus, while as the cilia of this epithelium, they propel this dust-laden mucus towards the larynx, where a cough reflex is generated, and by that cough reflex, this dust-laden mucus, it is spitted out from our mouth in the form of phlegm. So it continuously traps the dust particles and removes the dust particles in the form of phlegm from our respiratory system. So this is trachea. Now this trachea, it divides into two branches. Trachea divides into two branches. These branches of trachea, they are known as primary bronchi. They are known as primary bronchi. Branches of this trachea, they are known as primary bronchi. So this is the right primary bronchus, right primary bronchus. This is the left primary bronchus, left primary bronchus. Together they are known as bronchi. They are known as primary bronchi. As you can see in the diagram, this right primary bronchus, it is shorter but wider than the left primary bronchus. Right primary bronchus is short. Right primary bronchus is short and wide, while as left primary bronchus, it is long but narrow. Right primary bronchus is long but narrow. You know, our lungs, they are five lobed. Our lungs are five lobed. Our right lung is three lobed and our left lung is two lobed. So this right primary bronchus, it divides into three lobes. It divides and enters into the three lobes of the lung. This is first lobe, second lobe, and third lobe. So for that purpose, it is short and wide. It divides into three lobar bronchi. Whereas this left primary bronchus, our left lung is only two lobed. So it divides into two lobes, two branches. So trachea, it divides into two primary bronchi, the right primary bronchus and the left primary bronchus. The right primary bronchus is shorter and wider. Left primary bronchus is longer and narrower. Our right lung is three lobed. So right primary bronchus divides into three branches, while as left primary bronchus divides into two branches, right? So these branches of the primary bronchi, they are known as lobar bronchi. They are known as lobar bronchi. So these are the lobar bronchi. they enter into lobes of the lung. That is why they are known as lobar bronchi. So from left primary bronchus, two lobar bronchi arise. From the right primary bronchus, three lobar bronchi arise, right? Now, these lobar bronchi, they further divide inside the lungs. So we will study the further division of these branches inside the lungs. So first we have got trachea. Trachea divides into primary bronchi. Primary bronchi. Primary bronchi further divide into lobar bronchi. Lobar bronchi. Lobar bronchi further divide. These lobar bronchi, they will further divide into segmental bronchi. They will further divide into segmental bronchi. Segmental bronchi divide further inside the lungs into terminal bronchi. Terminal bronchi. Terminal bronchi further divide inside the lungs into lobular bronchioles. Lobular bronchioles. Then lobular bronchioles further dividing. Terminal bronchioles. Terminal bronchioles. Terminal bronchioles divide into respiratory bronchioles. Respiratory bronchioles. Respiratory bronchioles, they divide into alveolar ducts. Alveolar ducts. And alveolar ducts, they divide into atria, and atria open into alveolar sacs. Alveolar sacs. So these primary bronchi, when they enter into the lungs, they divide into lobar bronchi. Then inside the lungs, lobar bronchi divide into smaller branches known as segmental bronchi. Then segmental bronchi, they divide into terminal bronchi. Terminal bronchi divide into lobular bronchioles. It is up to the level of lobular bronchiole that we find these incomplete C-shaped cartilaginous rings. Incomplete C-shaped cartilaginous rings. They are present up to the level of these terminal bronchi. Sorry. Bronchioles do not have cartilaginous rings. Bronchioles are without cartilaginous rings. So cartilaginous rings, they are only present up to this level. Cartilaginous rings are from trachea to this level. So cartilaginous rings are present in trachea. They are present in primary bronchi. They are present in lobar bronchi. They are present in segmental bronchi. They are present in terminal bronchi. But after terminal bronchi, lobular bronchioles, terminal bronchioles, respiratory bronchioles, they do not have cartilaginous rings. So cartilaginous rings are only present after terminal bronchi. Bronchioles do not have cartilaginous rings. Then there are alveolar ducts, and they then divide into alveolar sacs. Now I will show you this respiratory tract and its division into these branches in this diagram separately. So this is the trachea. Suppose this is the trachea. So trachea first divides into this is trachea. It divides into primary bronchi. Primary bronchi. Now these primary bronchi, they divide into lobar bronchi. These are the lobar bronchi. Lobar bronchi. Lobar bronchi, they further divide. Lobar bronchi further divide. And they form the segmental bronchi. They form segmental bronchi. Segmental bronchi further divide. Segmental bronchi further divide. They form terminal bronchi. Terminal bronchi, sorry. They form terminal bronchi. Now these terminal bronchi, they further divide. They form the lobular bronchioles. Lobular bronchioles. Lobular bronchioles further divide. Lobular bronchioles further divide. They form terminal bronchioles. Terminal bronchioles. Terminal bronchioles further divide. Terminal bronchioles further divide. They form respiratory bronchioles. Respiratory bronchioles. Respiratory bronchioles further divide. They form the alveolar ducts. They form alveolar ducts. They form alveolar ducts. These alveolar ducts, they further divide. They form an ampulla-like structure, a pocket-like structure. These pocket-like structures, they are known as atria. And these atria, they open into alveolar sacs. They open into alveolar sacs. Or they open into alveoli. These are the alveolar sacs. Alveolar sacs, which contain the alveoli. So this is the division of our respiratory tract. So our respiratory tract, it starts from the nose. Nose leads into nasopharynx, which opens into larynx. Larynx goes into trachea. Larynx, it opens into trachea. Trachea opens into primary bronchi. Trachea divides into primary bronchi. Primary bronchi divide further into lobar bronchi. Lobar bronchi further divide into segmental bronchi. Segmental bronchi further divide into terminal bronchi. Terminal bronchi further divide into lobular bronchiole. Lobular bronchioles further divide into terminal bronchioles, which further divide into respiratory bronchioles. Respiratory bronchioles, they further divide into alveolar ducts. And alveolar ducts, they form atria at their ends. They form ampulla-like swellings known as atria. And atria open into alveolar sacs, right? So this is our respiratory tract. This is our respiratory tract. And this respiratory tract, up to the level of terminal bronchi, up to the level of terminal bronchi, it is provided with these incomplete C-shaped cartilaginous rings, which keep it open. Below these terminal bronchi, that means in bronchioles. In bronchioles, we don't find these incomplete C-shaped cartilaginous rings. We don't find any tracheal rings, right? And below this bronchioles, this respiratory tract, its wall is thin, narrow, and it is also lined internally by this mucosa, which produces this mucus, right? So this is our respiratory tract. This is our respiratory tract. What is the function of this respiratory tract? It carries the inhaled air down into alveolar sacs. Its function is to carry this inhaled air into the alveolar sacs. So it serves as the passage for this inhaled air to go into the alveolar sacs, right? Now we will have a look at the alveoli. What this alveolar sac is like. This alveolar sac, as I showed you in this diagram, as I have shown here, this alveolar sac, it is a collection of, it is an aggregation of large number of alveoli. Each alveolus is a small spherical structure. Each alveolus is a small spherical structure lined by a single layer of epithelium. Lined by a layer of single squamous epithelium. The wall of each alveolus is formed of a layer of simple squamous epithelium. Its wall is single layer, right? Inside the alveolar wall, there are some amoeboid cells wandering on its surface. These amoeboid cells, which are wandering on the inner surface of these alveoli, they are known as alveolar macrophage. Alveolar macrophage. And on the inner surface, on the inner lining of this alveolus, there is another cell. These cells, which are present on the inner surface of this alveolus, these are known as surfactant secreting cells. Surfactant secreting cell. Secreting cell. These surfactant secreting cells, they may be also present in the, they may be also found in these bronchioles. They secrete chemicals which reduces the surface tension of on these alveolar walls. When we exhale air, at that time lungs get compressed, and these alveoli also get compressed. These alveoli also get compressed. So there are some water molecules present on the inner surface of alveoli. So when these alveoli get compressed, these water molecules, they tend to stick these alveolar walls together. They stick these alveolar walls together. So here comes the function of surfactant secreting cells. So when these alveolar walls, when they are stuck together, at that time, these surfactant secreting cells, they are secreting surfactants, and these surfactants reduce the surface tension of water molecules, which are sticking these alveolar walls together. And by reducing the surface tension of these water molecules, which are sticking alveolar walls together, the water molecules are split, and the alveolar walls, they move away from each other, so that these alveolus can be easily inflated again. If surfactants are not secreted, then the force of cohesion and force of adhesion between water molecules, that is not reduced. Surfactants, they reduce this force of cohesion and force of adhesion. So if the surfactants are not secreted, the alveolar walls, they cannot separate from each other. They cannot move away from each other, and the lungs cannot be inflated. So that causes a problem known as respiratory distress syndrome. If surfactant secreting cells are not working, if the surfactants are not produced, then our lungs suffer from, our body suffers from a syndrome that is known as respiratory distress syndrome, in which we are not able to inflate our lungs, in which we are not able to inhale the atmospheric air. Because these alveoli, they remain stuck together. Their walls remain stuck together. They cannot be inflated, right? So this is the alveolar wall. This alveolar wall, it is formed of a single layer of simple squamous epithelium. So inside it, there is a hollow cavity. Inside this, there is a hollow cavity. So these alveoli, they are spherical, sac-like structures. They are spherical, sac-like structures. And their wall is formed of a single layer of simple squamous epithelium. Simple squamous epithelium, right? Their wall is formed of a single layer of simple squamous epithelium. Inside this alveolar wall, there are some cells which wander over this inner surface of the alveolar wall. These amoeboid cells which are wandering on the inner surface of this alveolar wall, they are known as alveolar macrophages, or they are also known as dust cells. They are also known as dust cells. They eat up all those particles which may enter into alveoli along with inhaled air. So minute dust particles may enter into alveoli along with inhaled air, or some pathogens may enter into alveoli along with inhaled air. These alveolar macrophages or dust cells, they eat up those small small dust particles and the pathogens together. That is why we call them as dust cells. Then on the inner surface of each alveoli, there are some cells known as surfactant secreting cells. These surfactant secreting cells, they produce chemicals known as surfactants. Surfactants. These surfactants, they reduce the force of cohesion and adhesion between water molecules so that they do not stick alveolar walls together at the time of inhalation. So they reduce the force of cohesion and adhesion between water molecules so that alveolar walls, they are easily detached from each other and they can be easily inflated again, right? Some of these surfactant cells, they are also present in the bronchioles. Some of the surfactant secreting cells, they are also present in bronchioles. Those surfactant secreting cells which are present in the bronchioles, they are known as Clara cells. They are known as Clara cells because these bronchioles, they are not provided with cartilaginous rings. So these bronchioles also collapse. They also contain some water droplets in them. So in order to make these bronchioles to open up again, these Clara cells, they secrete surfactants there that reduces the power of addition and cohesion between water molecules. So allow the bronchioles to get inflated, to get open again, right? So that is all about our respiratory tract. Now each of these alveoles is surrounded by blood capillaries. Each of these alveoli, they are surrounded by blood capillaries. How many alveoli are present in our two lungs? In our two lungs, there are some 700 million alveoli. In our two lungs, there are 700 million alveoli. They increase the respiratory surface of our lungs up to 100 square meters. They provide us a respiratory surface. They provide us a respiratory surface of 100 square meters. You know, many animals, they respire through the skin. For example, amphibians. For example, annelids. They respire through skin. But we as human beings, we don't show cutaneous respiration. Respiration through skin is known as cutaneous respiration. We don't show cutaneous respiration. Higher animals do not show cutaneous respiration. They show pulmonary respiration. If we calculate the total surface area of our body, it is just 1.6 square meters. Surface area of body. If we measure the surface area of our body, it is just 1.6 square meters. Our lungs, they possess 700 million alveoli. If we calculate the surface area of these 700 million alveoli, it amounts to 100 square meters. So they provide us a greater surface for gas exchange. So for that purpose, we have efficiently replaced, lungs have efficiently replaced skin as a respiratory organ. If cutaneous respiration would have been occurring. Then the total surface area for gas exchange would have been available. That would have been available will be 1.6 square meters only. If a person would have been exchanging gases through skin, what would have been his respiratory surface available for gas exchange? Just 1.6 square meters. Now we respire through the lungs. Lungs provide us a greater surface for exchange of gases. So the total surface area of lung alveoli, it amounts to 100 square meters. So this is much higher than the respiratory area that would have been provided by skin, right? So this is why lungs have replaced skin efficiently as a respiratory organ, right? So our two lungs, they have got 700 million alveoli in them, and they provide us a respiratory surface of 100 square meters, which is much larger than the respiratory surface provided by skin. So respiratory surface which would have been provided by skin would have been just 1.6 square meters, and lungs provide us 100 square meters, the surface area. So that is about the lungs, these alveoli. Now we will have a look at the lungs. We will have a look at our respiratory organs, lungs. Where these lungs are situated? Our lungs, they are present in thoracic cavity. Our lungs are present in thoracic cavity. In thoracic cavity, these lungs, they are covered externally by. They are covered externally by membranes. By membranes known as pleural membranes. Pleural membranes. So I will draw the diagram here. The trachea. The larynx is the trachea. This is the right lung. This is the left lung. These lungs, they are covered by membranes. One membrane is just over the surface of the lung. This membrane which is just over the surface of the lung. And another is above it. So there are two membranes around each lung. So this external membrane, it is known as parietal pleuron. This inner membrane which is on the surface of lung, it is known as visceral pleuron. And both the membranes together, they are known as pleural membranes. Pleural membranes. In between these two pleural membranes, there is a very little, very minute, very small cavity, which is filled with a liquid, which is filled with a fluid. So this cavity is known as pleural cavity. It is known as pleural cavity. And in this pleural cavity, there is the fluid. This fluid is known as pleural fluid. Pleural fluid. So our lungs, they are present in thoracic cavity. You know, our thoracic cavity is a closed cavity. It doesn't have any opening directly to outside, right? Our thoracic cavity is a closed cavity. It doesn't communicate with the external air through any opening directly. However, lungs are present in our thoracic cavity. So these lungs, they are on the two sides of the body. One on the right side, another on the left side. So accordingly, we call them as right and left lung. I just told you that right lung is three-lobed, while as this left lung, it is two-lobed. right? These lungs, they weigh some 900 grams in weight. The weight of our two lungs is somewhere about 900 grams. So we can say each lung weighs some 450 grams. These lungs, they are externally covered by, in thoracic cavity, they are externally covered by membranes. Those membranes are known as pleural membranes. Those membranes are known as pleural membranes. There are two membranes. One is just on the surface of lung. This inner membrane, which is present just over the surface of lung, it is known as visceral pleura. Then there is another membrane which is outside, external, which is in contact, which touches the thoracic cavity wall, which touches the rib cage. This external membrane, it is known as parietal pleura. So this visceral pleura and parietal pleura, they are together known as pleural membrane. In between this visceral pleura and parietal pleura, there is a cavity. That cavity is known as pleural cavity. And this cavity is filled with a fluid that is known as pleural fluid. So what is the function of these pleural membranes? So number first, they protect the lungs externally. They cover the lungs externally. Number second, they act as a shock absorber around the lungs. If any mechanical shock is applied, that shock is absorbed by the fluid present in this pleural cavity. So this fluid absorbs the shock, protecting the lungs from the mechanical injury. Number third, it provides frictionless movement to the lungs. It provides frictionless movement to the lungs. Number fourth, it also helps in the inflation of lungs, because at the time of deflation, when the lungs are deflated, when the lungs are compressed, at that time only the lungs, they get compressed. This pleural membrane, it remains over them as such. So it creates a sort of suction, it creates a sort of vacuum. So that develops a negative force on the lungs, which pulls the lungs back to the original position. So it helps in inflation of the lungs at the time of inhalation, right? So these pleural membranes, they protect the lungs externally. They provide frictionless movement to the lungs. They act as shock absorbers, and they also help in the inflation of the lungs by generating a negative pressure on the lungs at the time of this inflation, right? So that is the function of these pleural membranes. Now we can recognize each lung. Here is a conical structure. This top conical portion, this top narrow portion of the lung, it is known as its apex. And this broad flat portion of the lung, it is known as its base. So our lungs, they are somewhat conical in shape. Their top end is pointed. This is known as the apex of lungs. And their lower part, it is somewhat flat. It is known as the base of lungs. So this base of lungs, it rests on the diaphragm. Base of lungs rests on the muscular portion known as diaphragm. It rests on the diaphragm. This external convex part of the lungs, it is known as costal margin. It is known as costal margin. Costal margin. It is in contact with the thoracic wall. It is in contact with the thoracic wall. It is in contact with the ribs. So this is the costal margin of the lungs. This is the diaphragmatic margin of the lungs, right? This inner margin of the lungs, this inner surface of the lungs, this is known as mediastinal margin. This is mediastinal margin. And this space between two lungs, this is known as mediastinum. Space between two lungs is known as mediastinum. And in this mediastinum is lying the heart. In this mediastinum is lying the heart, with its lower and slightly turned towards the left. With its lower and slightly turned towards the left. So this is the heart here, in between the two lungs, with its lower end slightly turns towards the left. It fits in this notch-like structure of the lung, left lung. This notch-like structure of the left lung, it is known as cardiac notch. It is known as cardiac notch. So left lung, it has got a little concavity. This little concavity of the left lung, in which the heart fits, this concavity of the left lung, it is known as cardiac notch, right? So our lungs, they are present in the thoracic cavity. In the thoracic cavity, they are covered by membranes known as pleural membranes. Then we recognize each lung has got three different surfaces. Each lung has got external convex surface known as costal margin. It has got lower flat surface that is known as diaphragmatic margin or the base of lungs. Then the upper part of the lung, which is somewhat pointed, this is known as the apex of lung. The inner surface, where from the primary bronchi enter into the lungs. This surface of the lungs is known as mediastinal margin. It is known as mediastinal margin. And the space between two lungs in which the heart is situated, this is known as mediastinum. Space between two lungs in which the heart is situated is known as mediastinum. And the point where through the primary bronchi enter into lungs, this point here is known as hilum. It is known as hilum, or we call it hilus. Through this hilum, the primary bronchi, blood vessels, nerve fibers, they enter into the lungs, right? So this is about the external shape and size of the lungs. So I think this is sufficient for today. Thank you.